Hey folks, have you ever considered yourself a real-life private eye, or perhaps a modern-day Upton Sinclair exposing conspiracies and revealing the truth to the masses? If so, I have fantastic news for you. The bar for entry appears to be on the floor. The YouTube channel Gothic Therapy is, according to the About page, run by a therapist and a goth who tackle important issues like Cynthia Erivo is too ugly to play Storm.
You look more like Nosferatu, like a gender swap, race swap Nosferatu.
This woman is, for 1, ugly, 2, weird, 3, insane, and 4, just not a good choice.
Or how the new Spider-Man show went dark. Get it? Because, like, dark is a bad thing, but it could also apply to black people. Nothing to unpack there. But I'm not particularly interested in discussing the pop culture ramblings of people who still put the whiny like and subscribe because YouTube hates us messages at the beginning of their videos.
Before we get into today's video, please make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons because YouTube seems to hate our channel.
So offer up your souls, subscriptions, to break the algorithm curse.
Because apparently they think that bulletproof arguments like this just need to be seen by the masses.
Also, Spider-Man is now a influencer and tells people to like and subscribe to his channel, and I just want to throw something.
There's literally no need. He is frickin' Spider-Man. He doesn't need to tell people to subscribe.
Yeah, the only reason people aren't clamoring to see more of that is because YouTube is personally censoring you guys. Instead, I'd like to look into some of this channel's investigative work, which surely will be better than their pop culture commentary. Right? I've had a couple of brief interactions with the guy on the right here, Master of the TDS, primarily with respect to another investigative project that he did accusing a Twitter user of botting their likes using some very interesting leaps in logic. But I would say that the statute of limitations is up on that one, so today we're going to discuss his attempt to prove that the organization Games for Diversity faked research and exploited children. As we are soon to see, it should not be difficult to critique this organization, as Lord knows their work can be deeply flawed, to put it nicely. But Gothic Therapy seems to take a strange critical strategy that I'd like to coin forgetting how to read. Please note that we'll be skipping over the Sweet Baby Ink portion of their video. I'm just gonna assume that they're right about all that stuff because I cannot bring myself to care. Consider that their first and only win. Take it away, GT.
For the people from the Games for Diversity who are watching, because I know that you are, you guys really should have left well enough alone.
You seriously picked the wrong man to make an enemy.
I want you to put a pin in this for later because trust me, this is going to be hilarious in a few minutes.
Here's the worst part. How dare you? How dare you take your freaking gaming jams and make them into a research paper? How dare you?
Yes, you heard that right.
How dare you make your game jam into a scientific peer-reviewed research study that is published on Google Scholar with faulty, biased information and involving children? How dare you?
Alright, beyond this being the fakest fucking outrage I've ever heard, this is the beginning of the meat of their video, and we are already off to a strange start. TDS wants you to believe that he's furious right now. He's furious because in 2015, G4D used their game jams as a basis for a research article. Are you shivering in your boots yet? I mean, the nerve of these people to organize an event and then write about it afterwards. And yes, I'm aware he's also pretending to be mad about faulty and biased information, which of course we'll get into later, but he specifically carves out the fact that Games for Diversity published a paper based on an event they held, and I'm just left wondering, why? Does he believe that the participants didn't give informed consent? Does he think it's wrong to write a paper about an event you yourself were involved in? Either of these, or a plethora of other critiques, could be applicable here, but he doesn't give any sort of specifics and instead seems to be relying on the tone of his voice to convince you that something sinister is going on here. He's also acting outraged that this research involved children, as though the concept of publishing research that children participated in is wrong in and of itself. Spoiler, no, it isn't.
As a therapist, I know very well what peer-reviewed sources are. peer-reviewed source means lots of people have looked at it, means it's very much more valid than other sources.
All right, this is a nitpick, but that's not what peer-reviewed means. Yes, it means that more people have looked the research over, but that does not inherently equate to a greater degree of validity. Even a perfect application of the scientific method with rigorous peer review can still churn out mistaken information. It's just weird to me that someone who claims to have extensive experience in this area would say something like that.
The fact that this was allowed to be published and has remained up boggles my mind because of all the things that you have done wrong. It is so biased and skewed that I can't even begin to tell people, so I'm not going to. I'm gonna let you show them. That's right. We don't just know about this. We have the actual document, and we're gonna go over it.
At last, we get to look at the actual study. We'll get into what he means by bias and skew a little bit later, but I'd like to focus on that little brag at the end. That's right, we have the actual document. The implication here is that this document must have been in some way difficult to obtain, otherwise they wouldn't have acted proud that they obtained it, right? So I'm guessing that one of two things happened here. Either they Googled the article, clicked the first result, saw that it was paywalled, and then spent $15 downloading it, which would be incredibly funny because if you spent 30 more seconds, you could find a free download a couple of links down, or they did do the extra 30 seconds and are expecting you to be impressed that they've uncovered this free document. That's right, we downloaded an easily Googleable PDF. Please consider a PayPal donation so we can keep up this rigorous investigative work. The resolution that I downloaded their video at is fairly low and makes the article unreadable, so I will be superimposing screenshots of the paper on top of it in case you want to pause and read it for yourself. I'll also be linking to the site I downloaded it from in the description. You'll have to make an account, but hopefully an esteemed journalist such as yourself will be capable of such a feat.
I think people are going to be wondering at this point, why is it such an invalid and infuriating study?
Let's read the abstract of the study, shall we? The study used a research-through-design approach and organized game jams as a method to examine game design processes with the aim to investigate how the diverse identities of designers affect and inspire their game designs. During the Games for Diversity jams, we hypothesized that homogeneity in groups may lead to a single-minded message in their games, and diversity in groups may result in games that allow more freedom for players to create their own personal interpretation or interpretations of the game's content and mechanics. The results of this study suggested that a narrow theme and a diverse team composition may assist designers in creating novel games. As such, designers can find diverse gameplay and content from additional specificity in the Game Jams organization.
I'm mainly leaving this bit in so that you have confirmation that these people did, in fact, read the abstract. Now, to translate what it means so that you don't have to process it for yourself right now, essentially what this abstract is saying is that the researchers analyzed the context and output of a progressive-themed game jam, which, if you aren't familiar, is like an event where people get together and try to make prototypes of games in a short period of time, and determined that the more diverse the team making the game, the more unique and varied the end product was. The jams included people of varying sexualities and gender identities, as well as nationality, but we're not really going to address that later. And the researchers posited that the teams that had greater variety in members' identities produced more novel games, while the teams with lower variety in identities created games with more rigid boundaries for player interpretation. Now, to be clear, at least to my reading, this claim is not very well supported by the fairly minimal evidence that they present. In fact, one of their critical, what they call case studies, presents a relatively low diversity team that produced a game with much greater freedom in player interpretation. Based on the evidence provided, it seems it'd be more accurate to say almost the opposite, that lower diversity teams made their games more abstract and open to interpretation, while higher diversity teams built their games around a more explicit creative vision. In my opinion, neither of these conclusions are actually supported by what they've provided, because 12 games described in entirely subjective terms can't really be used to prove any point. They could have, at bare minimum, developed a rating system for both team diversity and game novelty, whatever those would mean in a research setting, to show us how the teams stacked up, but they didn't do that, and overall it makes it difficult for me to take their work seriously. They also use words like gay and queer to describe the participants, but don't properly delineate what the difference between those words means, which would be fine in casual conversation, but in this paper it makes it hard to trust their results because you could hypothetically use two different adjectives to describe members of a group to increase their perceived diversity artificially. I'm not saying they did this, I doubt that they actually did. I'm just saying it's hard to trust what they've concluded because they didn't do their due diligence.
Let's go into the actual thing here. Here is the setup, okay? This is what they did. Considering the Game Jam's pros and cons to explore socio-cultural issues, the team of game designers and researchers from the humanities organized 2 events, and it says the 2 events. The theme of both game jams concerned LGBTQ or women's perspectives. So keep in mind, they're hypothesizing that a more diverse group of people, game creators, will make better games. But then they specifically made the theme of their game jams only from LGBTQ and women's perspective. So already the entire study is a problem. But you might think, oh, okay, they must have done a control group, right? With like a normal group of people making a normal game. No.
There was no control group. No control group. The fact that they have no control group, that they have nothing to reference their findings against.
Now, if you've been paying close attention so far, you might find what they've just said quite confusing. The theme of the game jams has nothing to do with the conclusion they've drawn because the research is looking into diversity of the teams producing the games, which included people who were neither LGBTQ nor women. The study was looking at how those teams interpreted the game jams theme and incorporated it into their games, hypothesizing that the more diverse teams would create more unique games from this starting point. I know you guys read the abstract because I just fucking heard you do it, so how are you confused about this? No control group? This is a comparison of several case studies. It didn't need to set up a control group because it built the controls into the study. The independent variable in this study is the diversity of the development team, and the dependent variable is the novelty of the game. Those might sound vague and non-actionable to you, because they are, because this study is pretty bad, but the results would not be improved by adding in a control group of heterosexual men making a game with an entirely different theme. In fact, that would only make the results worse, because at least the teams that participated in the game jam were asked to make games under the exact same conditions. Everyone got the same instructions and the same amount of time to work, so in theory, the only difference between the groups should be their diversity. I say in theory because not only did the teams vary in size and nationality, which could obviously affect the results significantly, but because a study this small cannot possibly account for all of the other myriad demographic variables affecting the participants in this game jam. The obnoxious whining about no control group only tells me you guys didn't pay a lick of attention to the actual composition of this study.
The participants were recruited on LGBTQ-friendly websites, game review and critic sites, and academic mailing lists. So keep in mind, they did not get a sample. They chose specifically groups of people who were recruited through LGBTQ friendly sites. So not only does this not have a control group, but they took people who were already biased and decided, you know what, we're not going to have a diverse group of people to see genuine results. We're going to skew the results.
Once again, a complete failure to understand the goals of this study. Yes, the participants were selected from a fairly narrow pool, so you would be justified in arguing that this cannot be applied to the general population, but the study was on demographic factors such as gender identity and sexuality, not political opinion. Were this a well-constructed and evidence study, it would absolutely be useful when discussing demographic diversity of LGBT-friendly game developers. You have the perfect opportunity to accurately criticize this study, but you don't understand it well enough to do that. All you can do is cry bias without appropriately contextualizing how and why this bias is relevant, which is especially frustrating because the study itself is declaring its bias for you. You are so intellectually lazy that all you can do is repeat a few words of this paper describing its inherent bias and then say, look, this paper is biased.
What exactly did they have these people do? Well, I'm glad you asked, because we're going to get to that. They had children go through these 3 games. And as you can see, you think I'm joking? You think I'm joking? Figure 7. Boys playing Queer at the Night of the Nerds in 2014. Let's read what the game Queer is. If it didn't already seem strange to you, it will get worse.
No, that did not seem strange to me, because queer just refers to a demographic of people. I'm not going to be triggered by the concept of children being aware of a demographic unless you provide specific examples of child-inappropriate content. Now, if I already had a personal vendetta against queer people, then maybe I'd find that strange, but that would be a problem with me, not the game jam. Alright, we're about to get into some of the slightly darker stuff, at least in my opinion, so before that, allow me to recommend you check out a draft of the first few chapters of my sci-fi novel, The Empath, in the description. You can also take a look at the announcement video for a more in-depth, detailed pitch if you want to know what it's about. Either way, let's continue.
Queer was developed by SassyBot and Friends. The team consisted of 1 female designer, 2 straight male developers, 1 straight male artist, and 1 bisexual male designer. The players experience the world as 3 different characters, each with an inherent difficulty setting to convey a game-based metaphor for privilege. The player's objective is to progress with the assigned character through a normal day and remain in a good mood. The player has to get ready and go to work, but unfortunately on the way there they encounter a group of hateful protesters. When finally arriving at work, the boss also demonstrates intolerant attitudes. Yes, perfect. Just the kind of game that we want kids interacting with, and it's totally not biased at all.
Okay, so he gave us a description of a game in which a character's background has impact on game difficulty, and the character must solve problems related to poor treatment by society, and then said, wow, that sure sounds inappropriate, doesn't it? No, actually, it doesn't. Please explain to me exactly what your problem with that description is, because it seems to me that you're relying on your viewers to fill in some dark and twisted fantasy they've concocted in their heads to make it sound like it's disturbing. This part of their video is actually fucking disgusting, because as they said in the title, they're accusing these researchers of child exploitation, but are too cowardly to actually defend that position. So instead, they'll make vague gestures at, well, children were involved, so surely they must have been exploited in some way. Fuck all the way off. Your attempt to disingenuously use an actual serious issue to generate YouTube clicks is legitimately insulting to victims of exploitation. You know full well that you have no evidence of anything nefarious going on, but you have to whip up your fans into a frenzy because that's the only way they're gonna give a shit about your personal vendetta against a guy who published a bad paper 9 years ago. You won't, but I hope you know that you deserve to be sued over false accusations like that.
And the last game, which you think, again, these are only 3 games, by the way. It's called Drag Cube.
Another thing that's small but also deranged, this study observed 12 games, which you'd know if you actually read it. The researchers chose to highlight 3 of those games because they considered them to be representative of the larger whole. Fantastic work, dipshit.
And the last game, which you think, again, these are only 3 games, by the way. It's called Drag Cube.
Yeah, that's not suspicious at all.
No, it's not suspicious. It's called Drag Cube because it's a game about dragging cubes around and the developers thought it was a funny homograph. Grow the fuck up and say what you actually want to say.
Jams focusing on social issues with diverse teams in age, gender, sex, ethnicity, race, class, and ideology resulted in games with greatly varied content. But by the way, keep in mind, they didn't have a non-diverse group, so that would have been their control group. They just decided they didn't need that.
Yes, the fuck they did, dumbass. The games they highlighted had teams of varying diversity from 2 straight men and a gay guy to 3 straight men, a bi man, and a woman of unknown background, and analyzed the role of team diversity in their output. Now, you'll notice that the fact that this is the greatest difference in diversity I could properly describe to you does not bode well for their conclusions, but I cannot believe I have to explain to you that one team has 2 specified demographics, and the other team has 3 specified demographics. And this study is examining whether the group with an extra demographic included might produce more varied results.
The resulting games were not necessarily explicitly about gender, sexuality, or diversity. Haha, yeah, guys, all those games that were specifically about those things were not about them. You just read them wrong.
Do you not understand what subtext is? Some of these games made LGBT acceptance a core theme, while other games addressed LGBT acceptance as an optional metaphor. The game about dragging blocks is not explicitly about trans people. It never directly broaches the topic. It is implicitly about trans people because the developers built the mechanics in a way that allowed users to read into the theme of the game. How is anyone supposed to take you seriously when you fall at the hurdle of implicit and explicit mean different things?
We don't know whether it was intentional or not, but the facts are pointing towards it being intentional. You used children as your guinea pig.
I skipped ahead a bit here because they're now at the point where they're just repeating the same claims they've already made, but this is another example of them being insane cowards. By "you used children as your guinea pigs," she means you asked people to make some games and then allowed some kids to play the games. Because they haven't shown any inappropriate content in these games, because they can't, because there isn't, they're literally making an argument that would implicate every single games company that makes games for kids. Once again, fuck you people for abusing this subject for views.
I think this is what Games for Diversity didn't want you to find.
Well, guess what? I found it. You're welcome.
I ask you now to remove that pin we placed earlier. Remember this?
You seriously picked the wrong man to make an enemy.
It turns out by "you picked the wrong man to make an enemy of," what she actually meant was, this man will Google your name and read a paper you openly published. This is the truth they don't want you to hear, so secret and subtle you can easily find it online for free with multiple names attached. What a joke of investigative work. Remember when people actually tried to ascertain shady behaviors by doing a little digging, asking questions, and following rabbit holes? As it turns out, you don't have to do any of that. You can just look up a person, find something they publicly posted and never took down, and pass that off as an expose. But let's finish these people's dumpster fire of a video with one last opportunity to be scum of the earth.
It scares me because I'm going to tell you something else, guys. I'm not insinuating anything because I don't know this guy. He currently works with kids. Currently. Not just kids. He currently works with developing games and stuff for kids to help them with sexual abuse. I'll say maybe this was 11 years ago. I would hope that he has learned, and I hope that he's not exploiting sexually abused children. But if you are, and I find it, you better run. You better run. Because I will burn you down.
I'm not insinuating anything, even though I publicly accused you of child exploitation and am bringing this information up in an attempt to imply you're guilty of one of the worst crimes imaginable, but please don't sue me for doing it. As an illustration, and hopefully you understand by now that I'm not making this allegation sincerely, I'm not saying that Master of the TDS abuses women, but clearly he makes YouTube videos with a woman. Now, again, I'm not insinuating anything, but if I find out that you're abusing women, you'd better run. You got that, Mr. TDS? I'm not saying you abuse women. I'm not. I'm just saying that hypothetically, if you were, you'd better run for your life because I would hypothetically burn you down. Which, to be extra clear, isn't like a threat of violence or anything, just a weird, creepy thing I'm saying to demonize you. God, what pieces of shit. Thank you for sitting through this video. I had to get up and walk around several times during my first watch through of these people's garbage-ass video because I genuinely struggled to comprehend how people can be this slimy, but I felt it was worthwhile to examine just how fucking bad it is. If you value what I've done here in any way, I appreciate you doing the YouTube things like the liking and the subscribing and whatnot. I would especially appreciate if you checked out the first few chapters of The Empath, but otherwise, thank you for sitting through to the end.